really I could have just said no. I don't want anything to do with them, which a
lot of people probably do.
A lot of people do out of just, resentment, especially if your parents are drug addicted.
What's up, guys? It's the Park Car Conversation episode number 16. I am here with my girl, Cass. Thank you for being here.
No problem.
This is going to be one of my favorite conversations to date.
Me too.
Today, we're going to talk about something that is deep. It's not talked about a lot. I think we need to bring more light to it. And again, if this is your first time tuning in, or if this a podcast series that you've been listening to, the Park Car Conversation is a place where we talk about vulnerable things. We talk about things that sometimes are hard to digest, sometimes are hard to hear, but these are the conversations that we need to have. So today, we are going to be talking about life as a adopted child.
So I remember my childhood pretty young. My foster parents actually had me since I was pretty much born. Wow. I was adopted at 3.5, almost 4, pretty much my daughter's age. Now, it's so weird to think about. Like, right. I've recently think about it a lot too. Like, wow, like I look at her and I'm like, I was adopted. That was me. Like, I was actually really musically inclined growing up because I was raised in a Mexican household, foster home.
Wow. Yeah.
Even though it's my roots, I am part Latina, it just really stemmed from there. And I was just always inspired by Latin music growing up. And that's kind of what rooted everything to making music now.
Right.
But growing up, I was actually born in Vancouver, BC.
Right.
So that's where my foster home was.
Right.
I pretty much remember a lot. Like, it was a really full foster house. Like, there was, I believe, about 8 of us.
Wow.
And it was like government housing. Like, it was a small townhouse.
No way. And this is in BC?
In BC.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
And I was the youngest one, which is so weird. That's why I'm like, how do I remember all this? But
right.
My foster parents actually recorded me throughout my whole years of being there.
That's
and then
amazing.
When I was adopted, they gave me the VCR, and there's like a little picture of me on it, and it says my name. So I think that's kind of how I always kept the memory, even though I was so young.
Right.
Because growing up in my childhood, I used to watch it like continuously all the time. Like, I would just pop it into the VCR, and like, I guess from there, it kind of just kept my memory going from so young. Like, I can remember things from when I was like 2 years old.
Hey, listen, the subconscious remembers things, and if you do, and thankfully they had that recording for you, that's amazing. Yeah. So your foster parents weren't the people that adopted you? No. Okay. So do you remember that transition? Like, what was that like? Like, you got to go from one home to the other home. That's all you knew?
Yeah. So thankfully, I was only in one foster home
right.
before I was adopted. A lot of people get switched around. Like, some people are into like 5 foster homes sometimes.
Right.
Like,
that's so hard.
Especially in Vancouver, there's a lot of people who are kids that are given up because the drug addiction there is so high. That's actually like North America's highest point of drug addiction is in Vancouver, and not a lot of people know that. So the foster system is like, it's hectic there. Right. Also, my younger brother, he was also put in the foster system when he was born, but we were separated. So he was in a different foster home.
And that's from your mother's child?
Yep.
Wow.
We have the same parents, but...
Okay, and different foster home.
Different foster home.
Ooh, I got goosebumps.
Yeah, so if we actually weren't adopted together and brought to Toronto, I wouldn't have even known my brother, because usually adoptive parents will want closed adoption. They don't want
right.
Any contact with the biological parents, biological families, so... Thank goodness. Like, that'd be so weird to think about, like, not knowing my brother, and we're like this. Like, we're born in the same year. We're 10 months apart. Like,
ooh, Irish twins.
Yeah, so
wow.
we're really close. And I'm like,
wow.
I can't. And I remember, too, like, young memories of, like, before we were adopted, my adoptive parents had to drive, like, back and forth to each foster home and kind of get us to, like, play and stuff like that. But
God bless them.
Yeah, but
seriously.
My brother was younger than me, so... his perspective of like our adopted parents are different because he was so young, he didn't really understand what was going on versus me. I guess I was just more advanced than him at that age, right. So I understood more. Like, I already knew who my mom was.
Right. Your biological mom.
Yeah, my biological mom versus him, like, he would say, oh, that's Cassandra's mom. Like,
Oh, wow.
he didn't know her as, like,
Mom. So, okay, so we touched on that. That's something I didn't know, right? The drug addiction rates in BC, Vancouver. I mean, I'm sure drug addiction is a problem that is like worldwide, right? So it's breaking families, it's breaking homes. So now that we know that this is a problem, let's talk a little bit about that. So what was your relationship with, like, do you know your biological mother?
I do. I've always known who she was because I already kind of had that connection with her from when I was young.
And sorry, is that because you had you had an open adoption so that your
Well, yeah, we had open adoption, and also during the time that I was in foster care, my mom was able to still see us.
Oh, wow.
So she would visit us here and there, but due to her condition, it was more like birthdays. She would show up, and then when we got adopted and came here, we didn't see her for a long time.
Right, because she was in BC.
In BC, yeah, she's still there.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. What you remember as a child, or even now, your understanding. Your mother has a drug addiction. How is she doing now? Do you have a relationship with her now? What is that like?
I do have a relationship with her now. Back then, no, I didn't. But I didn't build a relationship with her till after I had my kids.
Wow. And you had your first child at what age?
I was 19, just turned 20 when I had Zaina.
Okay.
Yeah. So I always knew who she was, and I saw her. The first time I considered meeting her was grade 9 going into grade 10 summer.
She came to Toronto?
No, I went to BC.
Wow. Okay.
And then from there, I just found out everything. Like, I always knew my mom. I was always told my mom was sick. Just out of obviously protection. I didn't understand at that age, at a young age.
Right.
Yeah, they just always told me she was sick, and I didn't really understand, like,
What
why
kind of
can't I
sickness?
see my mom if she's just sick, type of thing, you
Right.
know? So when I went there in grade 9 and I met her, that's when my whole life story unfolded, and I understood, like, why I was given up for adoption, why I was in the foster care system, why I had to come here. And it kind of just all unraveled from then, when I was like, I wouldn't
Older,
say that's the greatest timing for a teenager, but I
yeah.
mean, it's all in God's plan, it was meant to happen at that time for a reason. But yeah, at the time, I just remember it being really hard to, like, all take in.
Right. And did your brother go with you to meet her?
did,
Okay, so
yeah.
both of you met. Okay.
And from there, he decided to not have a relationship with my mom, and
Right.
and I, not that I decided right away, but I just think it took a lot of years to process.
Right. And so now, that was when your first daughter was born, and now you have 2 children.
Yeah.
Right. And so do you still continue here and there to still speak to her?
Yeah, I talk to her all the time now. She
Wow.
calls my phone. Like,
Oh,
she
wow.
wants to talk to my kids, and it's so weird because, like, not that I knew she didn't. It's not like she didn't want to talk to me growing up. It's just, obviously, I know now she felt so much guilt inside that it was hard for her to try and make a relationship with me and my brother. But now that when she found out she was a grandma, like, she's been clean. She stopped doing drugs. Like, she's so much more coherent now. Like, before, it was hard because when I saw her so many years ago for the first time, like, she wasn't sober. So I was just confused. Like, it's one thing to know of drug addicts, but to actually, like, be from a drug addict is a whole different, like, world that I didn't know I was bringing myself into.
Right.
And then, to speak to her and her not be coherent and, like, hallucinating all the time, that's what made it hard for me to decide there, like, do I want a relationship with my mom? And then when I found out I was pregnant, it just all changed, like, for the better.
I got goosebumps. So can you tell us a little bit about what it felt like growing up? Because I can't even imagine, having to go from a foster care then into an adoptive home. So, you just are so exposed to so many different environments, different families. What were some of the thoughts? Like, do you remember having any thoughts growing up in terms of like your biological parents, why you, or like, what, like, can you just bring us through what that looked like?
Yeah, so growing up, I can't lie, I was an angry kid. Like I said, like my brother came into the adoption very different from me. Like, he didn't really know our mom. She kind of visited me more, so that's why I always had a connection with her. So when I came to Toronto, I remember feeling very abandoned. Like, that was the main feeling that I felt. I felt very confused.
Abandoned from your mom.
Yeah. And of course, I think up till I was older, I always had kind of that separation anxiety because I already knew, like, that was my mom. And on top of that, I was very connected with my foster parents. Because I was the youngest, I got the most attention out of the foster home. And yeah, I grew up feeling very confused because, you know, I wasn't told exactly what happened until I was a bit older.
You wanted answers.
Yeah, I wanted answers. And at the same time, I was a very shy kid, and I didn't know how to express those feelings and talk about it. You know, I do remember times I'd ask, like, where's my mom? Like, I would ask my adoptive mother or my dad, like, where's my mom? Like, how come I don't talk to her? And it was always kind of like a beat around the bush conversation.
Right. That must be hard for them, like, to, like, you know.
Yeah, and I never realized that till I was older, because then after I had my kids, I was like, oh my God, I can't even imagine, like, if my kid, who wasn't biologically mine, were to ask me those questions, like, I wouldn't even know what to say.
Right. You probably just want to safeguard them. You don't know, like, what's going to hurt them.
Yeah.
You know? Wow.
So yeah, I just felt, I think for the most part, the anger just came from confusion and feeling kind of neglected from my mom and abandoned. And just very I was very quiet because I was very emotional about it.
I have a question. So you went from the foster care. Did you, like, go from foster care to your parents, your adoptive parents in Toronto? So, like, you met them for the first time here?
No, they came. So the way adoption work is when you sign the papers, you have to go to wherever that child is.
Wow.
Because your birth certificate will still be registered in Vancouver and stuff like that. So they came there, and then we flew back to Toronto, and then I moved into Malvern.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been in Malvern since, like...
Shout out to the East End. We tolerate no East End slander out here. So how does your adoptive parents, like, are they receptive to you, like, having a relationship with your mom? Like, if your brother doesn't have a relationship still?
No, he chooses not to, which I understand. It's a really hard thing to choose. On top of that, with our biological father also, we ended up not having a relationship with. I actually didn't meet him till I was 19. Yeah.
And does he live out in the West Coast?
Yeah, he also lives in the West Coast. We met him, just didn't turn out, you know, he just never really changed, and it wasn't really a positive relationship. So me and my brother just chose to close that door. For the better, though. I mean, to be honest, I'm happy that I have my mom at the end of the day. I feel like that was more important than anything. I mean, at the end of the day, getting to know both of your biological parents, if you're adopted, is like, it's a blessing. Like, not everyone can say that.
Right. I can imagine it almost feels like a dream. Like, you know, I can imagine a lot of kids who are in the system who don't know who their biological parents, kind of just like, you know, like, that's a lifelong question. If you don't know who they are, just sitting there.
I learned, like, you don't know yourself unless you know your parents, because at the end of the day, you're half your mom, half your dad. And that's kind of why I was always open to getting to know both of them, because even though it was an open adoption, really I could have just said, no, I don't want anything to do with them, which a
lot of people probably do.
A lot of people do out of just, you know, resentment. Especially if your parents are drug addicted. I understand. Like, I have friends who have drug addicted parents that weren't adopted, and, like, they don't want anything to do with their parents, you know?
Anger.
Even though they weren't given up for the foster care system. So it's really a pride thing that I had to drop, which was hard. Very hard.
Like, almost forgive her for her
exactly.
choices.
Forgiveness was like a huge thing.
Do you think you fully have forgiven her now?
Oh,
now she's sober.
Yes, for
I'm so
sure.
happy. Oh my God, I'm so happy.
Even though I know she doesn't feel like I do, I tell her all the time. Like, I always give her that reassurance. Like, I tell her I love her. Like, you're my mom at the end of the day. I would never hold the past against you. Even though me and her will always kind of have like an awkward, strained relationship, I just want her to start over with my kids.
Right.
It's kind of hard to fix now.
With you and
with
your
me,
childhood.
yeah. But it's like, as long as you're trying to be grandma, like, that's all that matters.
Listen, sis, I can completely understand. And I think because my dad says the same thing. He got 9 kids, so he wasn't necessarily around for, well, my childhood, like present every single day. And to see him now be a grandfather and be like a great grandfather, he always says, he's just like, listen, people can hold me up from my past. People can hold him up and say you weren't this, this, this. But as a grandfather, I can't knock him. So I can't really like ask for more. Like I think in my own way, I've had to like also stop trying to like hold on to like, okay, like my childhood, like why didn't my childhood end up, like why didn't I get to experience you in that way? But as long as my son does, like as a grandparent, that's so amazing. Are there any triggering terms or comments that people have made throughout your years or even still make to this day that bother you about adoption?
I think just growing up, to be honest, when in elementary school, when kids found out that I was adopted, I actually did get bullied for it.
Kids are so wicked, man.
Now it's
Like, what do they
whatever.
say as a kid?
I remember this one kid used to say like, "Oh, your parents didn't want you," and stuff like that. As a kid, you would take it very personal because you're just a kid. Like, you're just vulnerable of anything that anyone says to you. But yeah, it was just mostly, your parents didn't want you, they gave you up type of thing. That was really the only thing I could say that triggered me as a kid.
Right.
Just because, I didn't know the situation the way I know it now. Of course, I know now my mom did want me. She just wasn't able to take care of me because she couldn't take care of herself. But, growing up, I was so triggered by that because then I'm like, oh my God, like, she didn't want me,
One thing that I want people to realize is that even like you never know someone's story, right? But I think especially when they're in like, okay, now they're in the school system, you're in high school, you might know what your friends are going through at home, you might not. I can understand it. I've also experienced other people in my life who parents have put them out at a very young age. Right, just very stern, and they go through these issues with people. It's just like, if my own parents can do that to me, right? Or if like I can't have like my own solid foundation for my parents, then like the world's against me. They always have a guard up, like they don't trust people,
Me all the way throughout high school. That's exactly like how I used to think in high school growing up, because my adopted parents had kicked me out when I was like 15.
Cassie, you're a troublemaker. Girl, you a troublemaker.
Honestly, it was just a lot of misunderstanding towards me. And then again, it's because, I think not a lot of people realize too is sometimes kids are adopted into a whole different era. Like their adopted parents are not the same age as their real parents. For example, my adopted parents are way older than my biological mom. So in terms of like talking about your feelings, like out the door, we don't talk about our feelings. We just go to school because back home we couldn't cry and talk about our feelings type of thing. Like the very traditional Filipino Hispanic culture, like they're just very strict, and it's like if I tried to talk about how I felt, it was just turned down like instantly. And that's why I think the anger from my childhood it always stayed with me until I had my kids. I never realized how mentally unstable I was at the time.
Right. And did you ever reach out to like, were you just closed off? Like, did you ever reach out to help?
No, I never did. And I wish I did. But at the time, it was just very hard to talk about. Like, I was still healing from it. Like, pretty much when I got kicked out at such a young age, that was a year before after I met my mom. So I was still like going through it. I was still angry. I was still confused. And I was just, and then, finding out that my mom had drug addiction, I was just like, I was always compared to her after that. Like, after seeing my mom, you know, my adopted parents really were harder on me when they should have been more gentle with me. And that was kind of what made such a restrained relationship for so many years with my adopted parents.
Right.
Was just the constant comparison to my biological mother and my dad.
That's awful.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Hard.
I can only like imagine. So now you got your hands full. You got 2 kids. You're going through childhood with them. How has being a mom, or has it changed the way that you looked at your childhood and your experiences?
Most definitely. It was like an eye opener. Like, after I had Zaina, my eldest, it was just a whole different whirlwind of emotions. And then I remember after I gave birth to her, like, the first thing that came to my mind was, like, I'm going to make sure I'm there for you 24/7. You know, like, it was a whole different feeling. And then, you know, as she grew up, became 1, 2, 3, 4, it just made me have so much more gratitude towards my childhood. Like, even though it wasn't the prettiest childhood, I still had so much gratitude towards it after having her, because I'm like, it could have went so many different ways. Like, even though I was so young having her, you know, I can't lie, when I was pregnant with her, I thought about adoption. I'm like, can I even do this? Like, it terrified me, because then, you know, I would compare myself to my mom. Like, am I even going to be a good mom? Like, you know, like, I have such a broken family. Like, should I even raise her in this type of environment? Like, so many things that, like, ran through my mind. And then having my son too, it's like, you know, I just thought about me and my brother. Like, every time I look at my kids, I think of me and my brother. Like,
literally.
That is me, my brother growing up. And it's like, I would never want to have them separated, or even have, like, the potential of putting them in the foster care system or losing them to the foster care system. And I think that's what always kept me kind of level-headed and, you know, stay away from certain people in certain situations, just out of the fact of keeping my kids safe.
Right.
Yeah. I think for me too, with, you know, my anxiety levels that I've had growing up, I think having kids really changed that. Like, you would think you would have more anxiety from having kids, but it actually kept me more grounded from, you know, just being anxious and having, you know, negative thoughts about my childhood. It's like, now that I see my kids, I'm like, oh my God.
It's a true blessing. It's a true blessing. It's like crazy how life, and not even crazy, I think that's just like you said, like, everything happens in God's time. Like, in full circle, you went through what you went through, and now you being a mom of 2, like, they have brought you that grounding. Right? Because, you know, being a mom at a young age too, and you have 2 of them, anxiety levels, my anxiety levels are through the roof. You know what I mean? Like,
they still go, like, super high, but, you know, it's those moments sometimes I step back and I'm like, you know, like, I just want to give them the childhood that I didn't have.
I love that. I love that.
You know, it's just like, I think about it all the time, and it's just like, I look at them and I'm like, I can't believe I went through all of that
at such a young
age. Like, and I never realized how, like, not normal it is for a child to be thinking those type of thoughts at that age. Like, at 4.5, you should just be thinking about playing outside and being a kid, you know? But me, it's just like, it was more, when am I going to see my mom? Where's my mom? What's going on? Why am I here? On top of that, I had a language barrier at Zaina's age when I was adopted. I didn't speak English until grade 1.
What did you speak?
Spanish.
Oh, wait.
Yeah,
from your foster family.
Yeah, they didn't speak English to us. So I only spoke Spanish. So I had to take ESL when it came to Toronto. So I just was like, I just remember, like, being super out of my comfort zone. And I'm just like, I look at Zaina, I'm like, thank goodness you didn't have to go through anything I went through as a child.
I have chills.
You just have to worry about going to school now and, you know, just having fun with your brother. Like, that's it.
Ooh. Okay, so I have a few questions, right? One is, what do you want people to know about children who are in foster care, who have been in adoptive situations? I also want your perspective on what do you have to say to people who are exploring adoption or being a foster parent? Because even in my own life, I've actually said I would adopt a child. I said 100%. And there's one stigma, and I always have this conversation, is that a lot of people want children to be adopted when they're a baby. And I know a lot of people battle with those feelings, like, could you love a child that's not biologically yours? A lot of people will answer, no, I could never. Like, I don't know if I could love them the same as my own kid, but I just love kids, period. There's so many children in the world who need forever homes, and they'll never get that, right? So I know there was a comment made, and it kind of bothered me a little bit, but I understand. They said, like, if I have to adopt, I'm adopting from a baby because I want that child to grow up with me. And just for that simple reason of that comment, I will purposely adopt a child who's older, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, an age where a lot of children will go through the system and then they're too old for people because they want them from young, right? And a child would have experienced a lot of life without me, but that's the type of age that I would adopt at. So I just want to know, like, your perspective for people who don't know anything about it, because remember, this is not a topic that's spoken about. It's very, I believe it's a taboo topic. No one really talks about adoption, foster care, group homes. What kind of advice would you give to people who know nothing about this life and who are also thinking about, finding themselves within this world themselves?
I think the main thing, learning from my experience and if I would want to adopt, because I have considered it myself too, just because I know how hard it is coming from foster care.
Right.
I think you just have to go into it with an open mind and an open heart, especially if you're going to adopt someone that's a bit older, that already, has memory of, being in foster care and potential trauma depending, on the home that they were in. But yeah, I think it's just really just being understanding towards them over anything. You just have to really be their friend, and be okay with the uncomfortable conversations they might have with you, because again, like, some group homes or foster care homes are really bad.
Yeah.
Things like rape and violence and fighting, a lot of that stuff happens, and I've seen it with my own friends that have been in the same situation.
Right.
But yeah, I think at the end of the day, adoption is a beautiful thing, and it's even, not even if, you can't have your own kids. I mean, I feel like that's one of the only reasons why people consider it, is because they can't have their own kids. But I think just in general, I think, like you said, all kids should have a forever home.
Yeah.
It's hard too, like, foster homes do get really crowded. There's just, there's always a negative stigma, like you said, about it, like, could you really love someone that's not your child? But it's just like, the innocence of a child is something you can't push away, and it's like, I've had people who have been adopted from, the same age as me, 3, 4 years old, or like my brother, pretty much since he was born, because he doesn't really have that much memory. And then I have friends who have been adopted from when they were about 8 years old.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that child's always going to be grateful for it, because living in a foster home is not easy. Like, even though I didn't grow up in one till I was a teenager, I remember how hard it was having a full house.
Right.
And just not having privacy, things like that. Like, that's a lot of things that kids wish they had.
Right.
Or just someone that they can call mom and dad.
Right. I think, like, in my own personal feeling, like, I couldn't even imagine, because I grew up, with, like, biologically my family, right? And so just in terms of, like, when you want things, right? It's like your mom, right? But if it's like people who are foster, or, like people who you're not used to, and especially, like you said, there's a lot of children who go from foster home to foster home to foster home to foster home. So, like, just feeling uncomfortable. Like, I don't go into, like, my friend's family's house and be like, hey, like, can I have this? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, things you might not feel comfortable asking people who aren't actually, like, your parent, who you look at a parent. So,
because you don't even call them like mom or dad, you're calling them by their first name.
You probably see some of your foster siblings, like, in and out the house. They leave. Yeah. You got to see them go.
Yeah.
And
very rotational. I do remember some kids leaving and then coming back. Some of them are not even that much of an age gap from me too.
Right. And I think one thing that you said that really like breaks my heart is that there are a lot of foster care people that don't have good intentions.
Yeah,
I know, like, like you get compensation for some of these things, and they go into homes where they experience abuse. People aren't really doing it just because they actually love children. They're doing it because
they don't have genuine care for these kids, and I see it all the time, and I've seen it with a really close friend of mine. Like, she never had a forever home, and now that she's a mom, it's like changed her life, being a mom. But I had to be there for her throughout high school because she was traumatized. Like, she moved from so many foster homes, eventually group homes.
Right.
And it's hard. It's not a stable life for those kids.
So one thing is for sure, God's timing. Now you're a mama too, and I'm so thankful that your children are going to be able to experience you, and you're there for them every step of the way. So life is really coming full circle.
Yeah. And I can't wait to like explain it to them when they're older, because like now my daughter knows, oh, like I have two grandmas, but like she doesn't
understand why.
Yeah, she doesn't understand why yet, but
there's like beauty in like the rawness of like people's experience, people's like feelings, their pain. Like it just shows like, how life works. And we focus on the beauty, like as much as you have gone through. And some people might not ever, they'll meet you and they might never know like what your childhood looks like. And then you hear like your story, and then all of a sudden, like me, I'm just so compelled. I'm just like, wow, because I couldn't imagine now being a mom myself, like just even having to envision my child having to go through that at the same age is just like, I have no words for that. Is there any last desire, anything that's burning on your chest you want to get off your chest about being adopted?
I just want to say to anyone out there who has been adopted or is like going through the system right now, you just really have to find it in your heart to have forgiveness. I think that is probably the hardest thing you're going to have to deal with, but that's what's going to make you at peace inside with your childhood. Because without forgiveness towards your family or whoever you might have resentment towards because of, your upbringing, you're not really living life. And I felt like I wasn't really living life to my fullest potential because I held on to those grudges and those angry feelings of, feeling abandoned and feeling misunderstood. And, of course, with my mom and her drug addiction, even though it took me so long to forgive her, and I'm happy that I did, sometimes I wish I went through that healing phase earlier, because then I wouldn't have been so angry when I was younger. Yeah, I think forgiveness is just key to people who are in that situation.
You heard it here first, folks. Again, I can't thank you enough for coming on the Park Car Conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Being vulnerable. I'm happy that all of us are going to be able to hear your story. Yeah, right?
I really want to be an advocate for it because, now that I've like healed from my past and I have such a great relationship with my mom, it's like I want to inspire others who think it's like impossible, because it really does feel impossible in the moment. Like you really think like, oh my God, is this my life? Like, why is this happening to me?
Right.
And it's just like, I know mutual friends that have been in this, situation, and I wouldn't feel comfortable having that like face-to-face talk with them.
Right.
But hopefully if they see this, it'll be a different experience for them.
I am inspired. I'm glad that you were able to sit, chat, talk. Hopefully you're inspired.
Yes.
Let's keep the conversation going. Park Car Conversation, episode number 16. Peace.